Yes, everyone, welcome back to another week and another episode of the Celtic View podcast. I'm Ryan Marr, and as ever, we're joined by our Celtic View editor, Paul Cuddihy. Paul, it's another week without any first team action for Celtic.
But it is getting closer. We're counting down the days, a bit like an advent calendar. We're just opening it up and we're getting to the 17th in terms of Celtic.
I know, it's feeling like it's getting a little bit closer. We've had the World Cup to keep us occupied though, so it's not been like a normal pre-season, but yeah, still counting down the days till we get back to seeing Celtic in action. We've got plenty to bring you in this episode, even without any first team action, because Paul, last week you sat down and spoke with Martin O'Neill, our former manager, who's brought out a new book, so plenty of stories to tell there. So we'll get into that all in a little bit. It's not been quiet though at Celtic Park. We had the announcement last week of new signing Alistair Johnston coming into the club. We had Yuki Kobyasahi, defender who we signed a couple of weeks ago. He made his first appearance at Lennoxtown on Friday as well, and we sat down to have a first interview with him. What have you made so far of getting this work done really, really early, and what have you made of it, the two guys so far, speaking to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in keeping with what's happened since the manager's come in. There's an element of forward planning there that we've seen that in the last few transfer windows of identifying targets, and I think obviously those two players in particular, it's helped as well that their domestic seasons have finished anyway, so even though they can't play for us officially till January the 1st, it means then that they then have a good period of almost a month. So Yuki's actually away with the team in Portugal, so it gives him his first opportunity to meet his new teammates, to train with them. And I suppose it lets them get up to speed with the kind of the way that the manager wants the team to play, and it's good. It's a good way of them bedding in before they hit the ground running, hopefully in January. And yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. I know, I spoke to Alistair Johnston last week via Zoom. He was still in Qatar, just about to leave after Canada's exploits in the World Cup. And I know as soon as he was linked, I think a lot of Celtic fans were taking a keen interest in Canada's 3 games just to see what he was like. He comes across really well. I think he speaks really well. I think he's really enthusiastic. I think when you look at his career and even when you heard the manager, I know you spoke to the manager about him, I think he fits that mould of a really hard-working player, a player that wants to get better and improve and sees this step as a massive step for him, but also, interestingly, for Canadian football. He said his manager is buzzing for the move as much as him, because I think it raises the profile, and I think the idea is that obviously the more Canadian players that are playing in Europe's top leagues for Europe's top teams, that can only benefit the Canadian national team, but obviously we hope primarily to benefit Celtic.
Yeah, and I think you said to Alistair as well when you were speaking to him, it's a Canadian player signing for Celtic, and we know that in Canada there's so many Celtic fans over there as well, so it must be great for all the Canadian people who are Celtic fans to have someone to kind of cling on to that a little bit more.
Absolutely, and I think the good thing is obviously there's no language barrier, but also he's not going to have to acclimatise in terms of the UK weather, because he was saying that I think he grew up in Vancouver, and he said that's really quite very wet, so it's kind of keeping in terms of west of Scotland. But also I think when he's playing in Montreal and the winters they had or they have are harsher than here, so actually it's probably quite mild, so he'll probably be delighted to be coming here. So those things I think will help him settle in really quickly, and then it's just a case of I think he's got a week off after the World Cup, and then I think he'll meet up with the team once they return to Scotland, and it's a case of then training with them. And I think over the years you've seen it where I think the players that are there that have done an incredible job so far, but I think also it raises their game and gives them a new kind of sense of enthusiasm whenever a new player comes in, because I think it just infuses the squad with, right, we're continuing to up our game with new players coming in. So I think it's really encouraging that both those players effectively will be available from the start of January to play for us, and I think that's brilliant from what the club have done.
I know, because we saw the impact last season when we signed Maeda, Ideguchi and Atati, and I think that was all announced on the 1st of January. So they were pretty much available as soon as the football restarted after the winter break, and you saw what a difference that made to the team, just getting that little added piece of energy to the team, the quality as well. So hopefully that's the case with these two guys. Obviously, don't know. We've had the chance to see Alistair Johnston at the World Cup play a couple of games. Not seen much of Yuki Kobyasahi yet to really know anything about what he'll bring and what he'll add in terms of his qualities. But even just meeting him on Friday to speak to him for his first interview with the club, he's got a little bit of a grasp of English, which is good. He was saying some words and trying to have a conversation. So hopefully that will help him settle in as well. And it always just strikes me, he's a 22-year-old, but with footballers in general, I think a lot of the time, kind of like the maturity levels of them for such a young age. I mean, it must be such a big journey to make at that age, to leave your home, to move to a new place. But you know, the players that we've signed so far from Japan have all taken to it like a duck to water. So hopefully it'll be the same with Yuki.
And I think it does help him, the fact that he was former teammate of Kyogo's anyway.
Yeah, of course.
That will help. But the fact that he's then got a small mini community within the club who are already settled in, who have done really well for us. Obviously, Daizen Maeda, we're hoping that we won't see him for a while, because obviously we're wanting Japan, to see how long they progress, and I think he's been impressive in the World Cup as well. So he'll not be there at first. Obviously it's a while before he comes back. But I think the fact that Daizen's there, Kyogo, Reo Hatate, Ideguchi as well. So I think it makes it easier, I think, for the new player to settle in. But then it's all about his football, and the manager had kind of said, again, he's got a month now to get used to the pace of the training and the way we play before he can even be considered. And I think the manager's not just looking at the next game. I think a lot of these things are long-term planning, so whether or not he immediately comes into the squad in January, or whether we bed him in slowly, the way the manager's brought these players in and how he's used them has been so impressive. So I think he's looking forward to seeing how he is. Yeah,
definitely. Paul, another person that you had the chance to speak to last week was our former manager, everyone's favourite, Martin O'Neill. How was it, the chance to sit down and chat to him? Because he just brought out a new book, didn't
he? Yeah, he's just brought his autobiography out. So he was up at Celtic Park. He was having a night, kind of one of the launch nights at the Kerrydale Suite, and there was a few hundred Celtic fans were there, enthralled by him. I mean, he's just brilliant. I think everybody remembers what he was like when he was here and what he did for the club, and kind of, to an extent, brought us back to where we think we should be, from the moment he arrived, and that iconic moment when he was on the steps at Celtic Park saying he would do everything he could to bring success to the football club, which is one of football's great understatements. And what unfolded over the next 5 years was incredible. But it was just great. And I did mention to him that one of the things that reminded me in the book is somebody who remembers him playing. It was a reminder of what a great football career he had, as well as what a great managerial career he's had as well. And I think you could, to be fair, I think you could sit and talk to him for hours and hours and never tire of listening to him, because he's that type of person.
Was he always like that as well when he worked at the club? And initially, obviously, you were here at that time as well, so would have worked very closely with him. Has he always kind of been the same character?
I mean, I think when he was there as the manager, I mean, you did feel it was his Celtic View and it was his match programme that we worked on, so you were working for him and he took a really keen interest.
He was almost editor.
Well, you were very conscious of the fact that he did read everything that was written in the magazine, and he was very supportive of it as well. So that was great from our point of view. But I think he was the manager. It was different. He's different when you meet him now, because he's probably more effusive and chats away. He did, as you would, keep your distance, because his primary role and his primary responsibility was the team. But he was great, and there was, maybe 2 or 3 times, certainly one of the highlights of my time at Celtic was actually after Martin had announced he was leaving and we'd won the Scottish Cup at the weekend, and he was basically going around the building saying goodbye to everyone, and he'd come into our office and sat for about an hour, just had a cup of coffee, and I don't think anybody spoke. I think we just sat and listened to him, telling stories about him playing under Brian Clough, and then telling some stories about what had happened over the last 5 years that we hadn't known about in the dressing room. It was, and at the end of it, you just thought how lucky we were as Celtic fans to be able to sit in his company and listen to him. And I just absolutely love him. I think he's just a brilliant guy.
He seems like a brilliant storyteller as well. I mean, you must have had time with him here at this club. I'm sure you've got plenty of stories, maybe some you can't tell, or some you can tell, but he just seems like such an amazing character and an amazing person.
Yeah, and as I say, I think when he was the manager, you know, it was a real interesting dynamic, because he obviously had Steve Walforth, who was the first team coach, he had John Robertson, who was the assistant manager, and they were the kind of conduit between him and the first team. And he did, kind of similar to what Ange Postecoglou does, he does keep a kind of distance. He's not there, he wasn't in the dressing room all the time with the players when they were training. He was very much the manager. They played for him, but you know, the guys that were on the ground were maybe doing the coaching sessions every day and according with his instructions. So as I say, I don't think anybody was there at the time, like in our position that we were working there, would say, oh, that we were really good friends with him. But he was brilliant to work for, but he was the manager, and you knew he was the manager, and his primary role, as I say, was dealing with the team, and he did it, you know, absolutely brilliantly.
What a team that was as well, because I mean, for myself, that's when I was first starting to get into Celtic, was the kind of the back end of that team, and just some of the moments, some of the players we had, some of the football we played, the memories are just amazing. So yeah, it's a brilliant manager in this club's history. And why don't we hear from Martin O'Neill now? We're gonna split up this interview into two parts. We're gonna have the first part this week and the second part next week. But let's hear from the former Celtic manager and his chat with Paul now.
Martin, it's great to have you on the Celtic View podcast. More importantly, it's great to have you back at Celtic Park. How does it feel to be back up in Glasgow and back here at Paradise?
Gosh, you know, this is it's when I've been into this room before, we used to set out with tables and things like this here, so it looks really strange, but genuinely nice to be back. Lovely to be back among some friends as well too, and Glasgow obviously pretty special to me, and Celtic Park even more so.
Now, obviously, we're here partly to talk about your autobiography, which has just come out. On days like these, I always love a book that the title sings to me. And as soon as I saw the title, I immediately thought of that famous Mark Monroe song and the opening of the original Italian Job. I'm not sure, because I know in the book you talk about some songs that you enjoy.
I'm glad you said that, because that is exactly right. It came from that my wife heard this song one day and watched back, found out it was is it the opening sequence to
it's the opening sequence to the Michael Caine
when the boy's doing the driving of the car, and the song, Matt Monroe's song, and I absolutely love the song, and so did my wife, so it was her choice, and said on days like these, which could be either could be good days or they could be bad days, you know, so make up your own mind. But that's exactly right, so you're spot on about it, you know?
Excellent. Now, obviously a lot of people will know you in more recent years, obviously manager at Celtic. Mm-hmm. People know you manager at Leicester, manager at Aston Villa, Republic of Ireland. Mm-hmm. What I think is really good about the book is a reminder for people of my age, but I think for younger readers, that you had a pretty impressive playing career, which maybe not forgotten about because people see what you've done most recently, but it's a pretty impressive playing CV.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so, but I think that there's definitely an element of that when talking about younger people, because my daughters never saw me play, and I had to remind them that I actually did play, that there was a part of my life before they were born that actually belonged to me and my wife. So from that viewpoint, yes, I can understand totally. So all they ever knew is about my early managerial time, and so just to stick down some things about a playing time. It's not that I didn't remind them. Of course, I reminded them all the time. But outside that, I'm not so sure that they believe me.
Yeah, well, that must have been nice for them, because obviously they've been involved in the whole project. But as you say, they're finding out a part of your life that they maybe knew wee snippets of, but you're going into detail of growing up in Ireland, how you made your way in terms of football and that kind of thing when you were, you know, a European champion. Because I was wondering whether you have the European medals there, just occasionally to remind them to say, look, this.
Well, another good point. I would say about 4 years ago, I don't know what, there was a sort of a spring clean in our house, and my daughters went up to a room, or one of my daughters went up to the room, and she was the first time. I genuinely think this is true. I think it was the first time that she saw the European Cup medal.
Right.
They're not on display. They will not blind you the minute you come into my house, you know. And
slightly disappointed at that.
Yes, honestly. And they were stuck up in an attic, and so she brought all the medals down. So we started to have a look at them, and and I think that she was actually, for the first time, actually reasonably impressed, you know. So, but really, they're great, naturally great days, and I think in terms of what I try to put down in the book was really the struggle to get there, the struggle for approval from, you know, one great manager like Brian Clough, in possibly the same way that some of the Celtic players of 67 days were, you know, pining for that approval from Jock Stein, and eventually when it all comes together, as it did for the 67 team in Lisbon, as it did for us Nottingham Forest in 1979 and 1980. Particularly 80 when I played in the final, it's just, everything's worth it then. All the struggles that you've had before become really worth it.
Yeah, because the back cover actually has a smiling picture of you with the European Cup.
Well, it's rather unusual, you know.
Yeah, well, anybody who reads the book will know that is obviously 1980, because obviously 1979 was the one where you were a substitute, and you did mention that when you see pictures of you after the game, obviously you're pleased for the team and your teammates, but as a footballer, you want to be on the park, you want to play in that.
Absolutely. This is the whole thing is about playing. I wonder today in the current game how players who are substitutes, how they really feel. Do you know, at the end of games, and in particular I'm watching some of the World Cup matches where all the substitutes are racing on, and it's a nice feeling if you're a manager to feel that everybody's together, but you know, I'm not so sure that is totally true. If you want to play, well, I think Ronaldo's kind of proved that in one aspect. But for me, you've got to be playing. You've got to be on that field. When that final whistle goes, you've got to be in that field. And I think the disappointment for myself and Archie Gemmill, who was a really, really top quality player, for us to miss out in the final when we had been heavily involved in the lead-up matches to that, was particularly disappointing. And the disappointment stems from the fact that Nottingham Forest, there's a fairly decent chance that Nottingham Forest are never going to contest another final. Yeah. So for to come round for me and play in the next one, and Archie Gemmill's left the football club, so it just shows you how disappointing that was for him, you know. So, just winning the game, and the contrast between that and the previous years, like day and night.
Yeah, because it did actually. What it made me think of was Jimmy Greaves in the '66 World Cup final missing out. Yeah. The likes of John Hughes, Joe McBride missing out in '67 for the European Cup final, and as you say, for people who maybe don't remember, Nottingham Forest coming up, winning the league at the first attempt against that really impressive European champions in Liverpool, then winning back-to-back European Cups, and the comparison would be Fulham winning the Championship last year, winning the Premier League this year, and then winning the Champions League for the next 2 years. It's extraordinary.
Absolutely, that's a very, very good comparison. You're spot on, and I remember our first game back in what was called the First Division in those days, would be the Premier League now, where we went to Goodison Park, and honestly we could not get a breath for 20 minutes in the game, and then I don't know how we got down the field, but we forced a corner, we scored from the corner, and honestly never looked back after that. It seemed strange. But I remember thinking that if this is what this First Division, or Premiership as it's called nowadays, is like, I'm not going to survive this, you know. And then you start to get used to it. You get used to the pace of the game. Then you start to get used to opposition, and you feel as if. And then when you're winning football matches, you feel as if, well, actually, this, in many aspects, this is actually easier than the old Second Division. It wasn't, but sometimes it felt like that. So overall, it was naturally great days, and you. Again, as I said to you, if you knew that you were going to be successful at the end, I think all the bad days you don't mind enduring.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me, and it's your journey, but you'll probably be the first to say you don't do it alone, and there was various times I felt that there was key figures, Jimmy McAlinden at Distillery, even Billy Bingham with Northern Ireland, obviously Brian Clough, that were key figures in your football journey at really important times for you.
Do you know what? I actually think that is important, and it'd be interesting, you know, if a player if a player has the sort of single-mindedness, let's say, of a Ronaldo or something like this here, then that's well and truly good to him. But a lot of people might not actually be built that way. Sometimes you do need someone to believe in you early on. And at Distillery, I'm an amateur really. I'm 2 nights a week as the semi-professionals were doing. But my first 4 or 5 games for the reserves were simply awful, you know. And yet Mike Linden, thankfully he hadn't seen any of the games, but he must have seen a little bit in training, and he said, "No, son, you're ready for the first team." And I felt that Thursday night when he told me I was going to be playing on the Saturday, I felt as ready as I couldn't be less ready, let me put it this way. And then I scored against Portadown and I never looked back. And a couple of months later we won the Irish Cup and I scored twice. It brings us into the following year's European Cup Winners' Cup. I scored against Barcelona, and 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, I'm at Nottingham Forest as a professional player. So all, as you mentioned, down to Michael Linden's real belief in me.
Yeah, I mean that is, again, it was the fact that the Monday after you won the Irish Cup and you scored the 2 goals, you're back in the college, I think going to a Latin class, is it? But I was wondering whether when you make that trip over to join Nottingham Forest, you're giving up your studies for law.
Yeah.
How did your parents, were they quite supportive, or were they maybe saying, you need to remember this, you know, you're giving up what is could be a really good career for something that's much more precarious and unpredictable?
Yeah, well, my mother was a driving force for education, you know, and my elder brothers and sisters before that, they had really decent educations. I know it helps when you pass what was called the 11+ in those days, and that got you a scholarship, but it didn't get you boarding fees and things like this here. So my father had to work hard for that, and so I spent 5 years at a boarding school before the whole family moved up to Belfast. But my mother would have been, if I'd said to her that I was going to continue with the law studies and continue in education, she would have been delighted. Really, she's a driving force for education, and I think my father really probably maybe have a less of a say in it. But I think there was something. I think it's secretly. I think he would like to see whether a son of his could have actually made the grade, and I think that was the case. But I did actually go back to the head of the law department at Queen's University and say to him, "Listen, you know, I'm in a precarious job for a while, and it might not come through." And he said it'd be all right to come back in the next 5 or 6 years. So from I kind of felt, not that I wanted to start. No, I didn't want to start first year law when I was 26. Far from it, you know. But at least in the back of my mind, I felt as if I could go back there.
And then you also make the point, the fact that it's quite funny because on the one hand your family decide to move over and you've enjoyed this brief burst of freedom and you're like, can I not get a few more months of it? But then at the same time, given what was unfolding in the north of Ireland, that actually it was maybe a godsend for your family to come over.
I think that you have summed it up admirably. That's exactly right. I wanted this freedom. I was enjoying myself, really enjoying it. You know, I'm whether I was doing well or not, but I'm pretending I'm doing really well. You know, at Nottingham Forest, and I just have this freedom. I'm staying in this place with another young professional, funnily enough from Derry City, Seamus McDowell. And we'd been thrown out of our digs in the first day, but we ended up going to this place that was full of workmen from all over the country, you know, sharing body tales and stuff like this here. So it was really fine, and I just there was something really remarkably brilliant about it because it was all new to me, and this is what I was really enjoying. But it was that sort of freedom. And then for parents saying, "No, we'll be over in the next week or so." Oh, hold on, just steady. No, steady. Can you not make that a couple of months now? But of course, then by the time that the troubles were, escalating, no doubt at all about it. By the end of 1971, 72, and you're talking about Bloody Sunday in late January of 1972. So. The idea or the decision for them to come over actually proved pretty fortuitous.
you obviously, you start life at Nottingham Forest. It's a pretty impressive start. Again, I think you said 24 days after you join, you make your debut, a goal-scoring debut. You follow that up with a goal against Manchester United at Old Trafford. You're talking Best, Charlton, Law. These guys, again, kind of similar to what you were saying about how when you start in the first division with Nottingham Forest, you think, this is easy. Was there a wee sense of, this is great, this is...
Absolutely. I jokingly say that I thought, what an easy game this is. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out like that at all. And there were many moments, even during the course of that season, where I felt that the game was really beyond me. One moment in particular against Derby County, who ended up winning the league that year. We're playing at the baseball ground. The pitch is just a quagmire, and I've got the ball in the middle of the field, and you have a quick picture in your mind of where you want to move to, and it seemed as if I had plenty of time to manoeuvre the ball. I hadn't gone 3 steps until I think it was Colin Todd came in and robbed me of the ball, and I honestly thought it's like a moment. I remember Kevin Keegan some years later talking about a moment when he was, I think, playing for Newcastle, where he felt that just something like that had happened to him, and he realised he can't do it anymore. And he had already proved himself. I'm a young fellow in the team, and I think, wow, this is really tough. And that day, Derby County beat Nottingham Forest about 4-0, and really the gulf between the two teams was incredible. And Derby go on to win the league, Nottingham Forest get relegated, and that's when you realise you're a long way from the top.
Yeah, but I mentioned obviously some key figures, and certainly as a player when Brian Clough's arrival at Nottingham Forest obviously changes everything at the club. I'm guessing that for the players as well, because you've got somebody who's won the first division with Derby before, needs to prove himself again after what happened at Leeds, and he changes the whole dynamic of the club. Did you sense that right away?
Yes, you could, even though we won the first 2 games under Brian Clough, and you know what? He never won another game for 16 matches. Incredible. But Brian Clough was never going to get sacked because he was Brian Clough. So, yes, even though the games didn't necessarily follow until Peter Taylor arrived, you just knew that there was something going to stir. There was something stirring about it. It was taking a wee bit longer than even he would have imagined, but there's something stirring, it's probably the best way to describe it. And when Peter Taylor arrived 17 months later, the two of them, there was a renewed energy about Brian Clough. His mate had joined him, giving him all the confidence in the world. Not saying that Brian Clough had lost confidence. I think he did a little bit when he was thrown out at Leeds United. But eventually, with Peter Taylor arriving, Taylor's eye for a player, Taylor's motivation of Brian Clough, more than motivation of us players, but motivation of Brian Clough to become the Brian Clough that everyone knew. And together, you just felt that they were going to make something happen at the club. You just wanted to be around when it was, and that was the most important thing.
Because he's obviously, and people would have looked over the years, particularly when you went into management, of his influence, and I think I'd be right in saying that of all his ex-players, you would be the most successful that went on in terms of management. But I was wondering, even that idea of him and Peter Taylor, something clicked. And again, you make the point in the book about the importance of that unit that you had, John Robertson and Steve Walford, and having that absolute trust in them and knowing you were all in sync. You would obviously have had disagreements behind the scenes, but to the players, and that was so important for you, and we get the benefit of that here at Celtic, obviously.
Well, John and Steve were instrumental in our success. I thought that yes, we were very, very tight together, the three of us. I think that what I said to John and Steve is, listen, you're in among the players, you're there, Steve particularly as a coach, and John developed great rapport with the players. And I said to them, unless something really serious is happening, don't be reporting everything back to me. I don't need to know it, I don't need it. And so the players developed a great trust in John and Steve. And while not for 1 minute did I think I remained aloof from it, I don't think I did, but I just kept a little bit of a distance away, where your voice was really important in match days and things like that. So, but John, myself and Steve were really tight-knit, and I think the players realised that, you know, that they weren't going to be influencing someone there, you know, to, not that they would want to have broken up the trio, but I think that trust that you had in them was so important. For instance, I knew that John or Steve, whatever, as you mentioned, any sort of disagreement we might have in private, you knew that when I make the decision that they're not going to go into Henrik Larsson and say, well, Henrik, you know what, I would have picked a different team to that, and you just knew that was never going to happen. And when the players realised that, I think that's we all became a sort of a closer group.
Yeah, because trust is, I guess, is such a key element in football in so many different relationships. And as you say, you had a really strong dressing room of top players and big, strong personalities, which you were having to manage. But they need to trust your process. They need to trust what you're doing. And as you say, sometimes they need to trust the assistant manager. And they need to trust the coach. And if any of that breaks down, that's probably why you see other teams when it doesn't work.
Yes, I think that you're absolutely right. And I felt that, as I say, most important thing, as I knew that Steve and John wouldn't let you down. They wouldn't be going behind your back and saying something different to what, you know, whatever. Even if their opinion was different to the one that you were forcing down their throats, as it were. Sometimes I had to do that. And I just get back to the players. The players. They grew to really trust John and Steve in many aspects. They grew to be very, very friendly with them, and they knew that whatever that they would be saying to to John and Steve, that John and Steve were not reporting immediately back to me, you know. And I didn't need it either, you know. I had more important issues to deal with, you know.
Here we go, that was Martin O'Neill, and as we said, we'll give you the second part of that interview next week. And it was a night last week, Paul, where Celtic fans got to come and meet Martin O'Neill, and by all accounts, just from the chats we've been having afterwards, he seemed like he was in brilliant form on the night. The Celtic fans seemed to love the night as well, and also just stories of him signing every single person's books. He just seemed to have so much time for everyone.
Yeah, and interestingly, we were talking to the woman who from the publishers who was accompanying him on this kind of book tour, and she said he's been absolutely brilliant to work with. And I think every person that's sort of met him, whether it was at Celtic Park or elsewhere, he spends a bit of time with them. I think it's not just a case of signing the book. I think every book signing or signing of a book is a personalised message. You'll sit and talk to them, take photographs, and been really great. I think really grateful that people are buying his book and want to read his story. And I think it just kind of emphasises that, you know, how much he means to Celtic fans, but also I think how much Celtic means to him, because he did say in the interview that he could have written a whole book just on the 5 years of Celtic, because obviously it's the story of his whole life from growing up in Ireland, and then he's progressing as a footballer and then becoming a manager right through to managing the Ireland national side and what he's doing now. But you know, there could have been several volumes given everything that he has achieved in the game. But yeah, I think everybody who was there at the Kedale Suite was just really impressed, as probably not surprisingly, but yeah, I think they absolutely loved it.
Brilliant. There was also some football over the weekend for the women's team and the B team, Paul. We'll start off with a roundup of the women's team action. There were 7-0 winners on Sunday night against Dundee United. That keeps them still 3 points off the top of the league and in the hunt for the title race. And was another impressive display and another big victory for the women's team this season. It's not the first time that we've said that.
Yeah, and again, I think if you look at the spread of goals, I mean, it was Shen got a hat-trick, her first hat-trick for Celtic, but there was quite a good spread of goals. Maria McInerney and I think Tyree Burchell, who a famous surname and a famous dad, obviously, who scored a few goals for us, Mark Burchell during his time. They both are academy graduates, they both got their first senior goals for Celtic. So there was a lot of positives, and I think the target had been, we've got another home game against Motherwell just before Christmas, so I think the target was to make sure we win those games and go into the break. There's a short break of a few weeks and a really positive frame of mind. So a really, really impressive victory, and I'm sure that, Fran and Alonso will be delighted with that. Yeah,
as we said, at the start of the season we saw a lot of these big victories. I think we had a 9-0 and we had an 8-0 as well. At the start of that season we weren't conceding many goals, and then of late we've I think won the last 2 games now, but we had a result against Glasgow City which didn't go our way. Then got a good point against Rangers in the derby, so things now seem to be kind of getting back on track.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's such a long way still to go, and the games against Glasgow City and Rangers, I think between the 3 clubs will be crucial in determining the outcome of the title, because there is very, very little to choose between the 3 teams. As you see, I think we narrowly lost to Glasgow City, we drew against Rangers and could have actually won that game. So those games, and I think Rangers drew with Glasgow City, so those games are going to be key. But in and around that, I think as we saw last season, that we maybe dropped some points against sides that we were expected to win. And I think what the team's done this season, they had a few changes, but it seems to be they lose very few goals and they're scoring a lot of goals. So they're making sure that when they come into these big games that they are crucial, and it's just a case of then taking the next step and winning 1 or 2 of them, just to, as you say, they were still well in the hunt, and there's still such a long way to go in the season.
Yeah, and for the B team, they're now up to 2nd in the Lowland League table. They had another impressive victory themselves, 5-0 win over Edinburgh University. Again, similar to the women's team, things seem to start to be picking up again for the Bees.
Yeah, it was a busy week, obviously, plenty of goals. The 4 each game the previous weekend that we spoke about, and then they had a good 2-1 victory in the midweek where they had to come from behind and get 2 goals, which again, that Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, that would have been a really big win for them, just to, on the back of the 4 each game, which they should have won. Probably disappointment to bounce back and make sure they didn't drop any points against Bo'ness. But then to follow that up with a pretty emphatic 5-0 win at the weekend, and again that's encouraging. They've got a lot of games still coming up over the next few weeks, including a pretty big derby at the end of the month. So they, I think the Darren O'Dea and Steve McManus will be pleased with the way that the team, we spoke about it before, that the benefits of playing in the youth league, the UEFA Youth League, is they're beginning to reap those benefits, and you can see the players now know the benchmark that they need to reach, not only at that level, but then to try and push on, because ultimately they all want to end up in the Celtic first team. So no, a really, really encouraging win. Yeah,
this week they've got Berwick at home on Tuesday night, and then Cowdenbeath away on Saturday. It's obviously interesting with the B team, because we talk about it a lot here, and Darren and Stephen talk about it, how it's more about the development and making sure they're playing to a certain style, potentially a lot of time over the results. Because if you were to look at it, if this was the first team and you had the derby game coming up, so Rangers are top at the moment in the Lowland League, Celtic are 2nd, you'd be thinking, right, you just need to win all your games, get to that point, get another win, and then you're chipping off more points in the table, hopefully go ahead at that point. Do you think that's something that will be in the B team's mind, or you just still think they'll have that same mentality of just focus on the performances?
Well, I think there's a balance. I mean, I think definitely in the way that the setup is this season, in terms of normal circumstances, replicating the first team, and I think because there's so many games, I'm sure that the coaches have been drumming into never look too far ahead. So there's a game on Tuesday night. That'll be their sole focus, when they're in training today. But I've heard Darren and Stephen saying obviously the performances are important, but winning mentality is part of their development as well. That I'm sure if at a certain point, if the performances were great but we were losing every single game, then they would look at that again, because you want to breed that winning mentality, because those players, when they get into the first team, winning is everything. You know, a draw is not acceptable. That's the pressure of playing for Celtic, and it's why the players that play for our first team, that's what's so impressive, because not every player can cope with that. So that's part of the development. Obviously, when they're looking at performances and they're seeing that they're doing the right things from training and they're implementing the instructions, that's pleasing. But part of that is, it's kind of similar to when the manager used to keep getting asked about his style and his philosophy, and after a while I think he just get tired of it, and he said, look, I'm not doing this because I just enjoy watching it, I'm doing it because I know it's successful and we win games, which has proven to be the case. So if you're replicating that at a B team, it's because ultimately they know, when Darren and Stephen are training these players, they know they're doing it because on the Saturday they think this is going to win us the game, and that's, more often than not this season, that's proven to be the case.
Yeah, I suppose one of the successes as well for the B team so far this season has been that the trip to Australia, and the first team are away in Portugal at this moment in time as well, as both Rocco Vata and Bosa Noel have been in both of those trips and impressed as well. So that's obviously what the B team are there to do, to get players and put them into the first team environment, and hopefully they become first team regulars. So it's great to see those two guys up there and performing well, and I suppose that's a consideration to keep in mind for the B team, that they've still been winning games, and that's without two really important players for them as well. So hopefully, I'm sure the guys want to get some more minutes over in Portugal, and it'll be a good experience for them. Paul, to finish off, as we always do, a predictions game. Last week, me and you both only got 4 points. The fan we had on got 6 points last week, so they beat the two of us. We're recording this on Monday, so we're going to take some of the games that are taking place in the World Cup on the Monday as well, just in case this goes out a little bit later on. But just in general in the World Cup, we've obviously had 4 Celtic players there. It was amazing to see them all get through to that round of 16. We're speaking ahead of Japan playing Croatia, so we know that one Celtic player is definitely going to get into the quarter-finals. What have you made of the World Cup, and obviously the Celtic players' contributions as well?
Kind of like what you touched upon at the start of the podcast, is I suppose it's been a welcome distraction, the fact that there's not been any Celtic games. And I think, like all these tournaments, it builds a bit of momentum the longer the tournament goes on, and then it gets into the knockout stages, so it's a winner-take-all each game. I've enjoyed watching it. There's been a few surprises, and generally, and I think you see start to filter, like it's England, France in the quarter final, Holland versus Argentina, so it's the big kind of powerhouses of world football, as it were. So you're really excited, looking forward to those games. In terms of the Celtic players, I think you can see, so for example, I think Aaron Moy was exceptional, and what was interesting was a slight frustration for me, because there was a couple of games where I was almost shouting at the TV, telling the commentators, do you know he's been playing for Celtic for the last 6 months? Because they're so obsessed with any player's link with the English Premier League. And the reason why he's doing so well, he's obviously a really good player, but the reason why Australia get the benefit, when he helped them qualify, he was out, he didn't have a club, hadn't really been training much, but obviously gave everything to get them there. But the fact he's been playing with us for the last 6 months, playing in the Champions League, you saw the benefit of that, and actually he was one of the standout players for Australia, just having that ability to put his foot in the ball just for those few seconds and keep possession, and I thought he was absolutely exceptional. I think Japan, again, the game that they dropped, Daisen Maeda, was the game that they lost.
Yeah.
And the 2 other games against the stronger opposition in Germany and Spain, it was almost as if the manager had said to him, right, play for an hour, through the middle, completely stretch the defence, run them ragged, and then you've done your job, and then we'll send in a couple of fresh faces, and it's really benefited them. So I would be surprised when they play the game against Croatia if that's not the formation, because Dyson through the middle I think has been excellent, and again the managers in those games, the balance has been really good. I think America made a mistake in not playing Carter Vickers in their game against Holland. I thought he played really well in the game against Iran, and then they kind of reverted back to the previous back four. So he'd have probably been frustrated at that and disappointed that they maybe didn't push Holland more than they should have. And again, Croatia, Josip Juranovic is, is part of a really strong Croatian side. You have to remember that team there's not a massive amount of that squad that were in the World Cup 4 years ago, but they have that, you know, that mentality of knowing how to get on in the tournament. So the game against Japan's going to be really interesting.
Well, indeed, and that is going to be first up for our predictions. We've got Tony Brown on as well this week, who's playing for the fans. And yeah, if you want to take part, then just drop us a line on our Celtic View Twitter to get involved. So yeah, first one, Japan against Croatia. Now, the World Cup so far, we've had shocks, we've had surprises. As of yet, in the round of 16, we've not had any. I think there probably will be maybe one or two surprises to come. Croatia are probably the favourites because of their past experience in the World Cup. Will there be a surprise in this one? Will Japan get through, or will Croatia do it?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think this is probably the tie of the last 16 that, you know, if either side win, it's not a surprise. I mean, the fact that Japan have beaten Germany and Spain and have done well in previous tournaments as well, that I think they weren't that far away from getting to the quarterfinals. Was it Belgium beat them late on? They were winning 2-0 at one point. So I think either way, I think either of those teams can get there on merit. I do think Japan will shade it. I think they're just, there's something about I think the one danger for them is they seem to be a team that, so in the Germany game and the Spain game, it could have been all over at half time. Both of those countries dominated in the first half without finishing Japan off. But in the second half, it was almost like a different team, and teams struggled to cope with their energy. So I'm going to go similar to those other two games, 2-1 for Japan.
Okay.
Probably everybody's predicted that.
Yeah, no, well, Tony's went for 2-1 to Croatia, and yeah, I'm going for Maeda to just pip Juranovic as well, and I'm going 3-1 actually to Japan. And that one. So, because Japan, as you said, what's been good about them is that they've went behind the games, and the game they won against Spain and Germany, they came back from behind, which shows a real strength. So I can see Croatia getting a goal, but I think Japan might do it. I've been impressed with them in those two wins. Next up is Brazil against South Korea. Brazil, a team that have probably been most people's favourites at the start. South Korea have, I suppose, their group with Uruguay and Ghana. It really could have been any of those three teams that went through, and Korea just sneaked in, but they have that man Son up front as well. So will they cause a surprise, or will it be Brazil? No, I think Brazil will get through. It's interesting, I'm not quite sure. So South Korea, I mean, it was an injury time goal that got them through, so there'll be the euphoria of qualifying from that group. I suppose that can work one or two ways, because then there's no pressure on them. They are playing probably the pre-tournament favourites, so they might just be that they just go for it. I just think Brazil have got too much in terms of firepower, and I think Neymar's back for this game as well, which I think will make a difference, because I think he focuses attention as well, which allows maybe space for some of the other players to do, you know, the damage which we've seen in previous games. So I'm going to go for 3-1 to Brazil. Okay, Tony's went for 4-0 and I'm going for 2-0 in that one. Just off the top of my head, I don't think Brazil have had a game would have really sort of like wiped the floor in terms of goal scoring yet. I think it's been a couple of maybe 1-0s and a 2-0, and then they obviously lost the last game, but they made a lot of changes. But yeah, I think it will still be fairly tight, but Brazil will edge it. There's two other games in the round of 16, and maybe there's the two games, if you were to say there might be a surprise, they might have come in one of these two before the round of 16 started. So next up is Morocco against Spain, and I don't know who's actually going to come out on top in the end, but I've went for like a draw after 90 minutes of two each. I've been really impressed with Morocco, and I've been impressed with Spain in spells. You just kind of maybe feel like they can turn it on a little bit more if they have to, but I think they're two good teams and might be quite evenly matched. Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think if it was just a possession World Cup, Spain would be the champions by far, and I think that was interesting when they played, you know, their last game. They had all the possession in the second half, and Japan, I mean, it was a really good performance defensively from Japan. But I felt another team that would maybe be a bit more direct at times would have beaten them, because they laid siege to the penalty area without creating too many chances, and it was almost as if they were trying to pass their way in for the perfect goal. So I'm not sure. I almost feel like Spain, there's a team there that,
you know, you could see the next Euros or the next World Cup, everything will come to fruition, and you know, they would be one of the favourites. I'm not sure if there's maybe one or two teams that are slightly better than them. I actually think I'm going to go 2-1 Morocco. I actually think Morocco. I think there's a directness about Morocco. I think there's a lot of really good players and the really good football. We always talk about there's maybe one team that's going to surprise people in the tournament and get further than people expect. I think it's going to be Morocco, so I'm going to go 2-1.
I was weighing up a 2-1 as well. I thought it might just they might end up winning
So who's going to end up winning? Because obviously at 2 each it goes to extra time and penalties.
I really don't know. Everything inside me wants to say Spain because of the players that they have, and it's Spain, the nation. So you always have confidence in them. But I kind of feel like Morocco might do it as well. I think they could. I don't think I'd be completely shocked if they do because of what they've done already this tournament and looked really good. So if I had to be pushed eventually, I'd maybe say Morocco as well. But I'll go for 2 each over 90 minutes. And that's ideal as well because Tony's went for 2-1 to Spain, so we've got 3 different results there. So someone's going to win anyway. Someone's going to get a point. The last round of the 16 game is Portugal against Switzerland.
I think that's got penalty shootout written all over it. I think Switzerland, I think we spoke about it before, they're one of those teams that you would never want to get them in the group stages because they're a very difficult team to beat. I think they get out the group quite often. There was a wee edge to their game against Serbia for political reasons. You could see, especially Granit Xhaka was like a man possessed to make sure that he beat Serbia, and Shaqiri as well. So I'm not sure they expended a lot of energy getting past that. I think Portugal probably look like the better team, get more attacking options, but they're not prolific goal scorers. So I'm going to go for 1 each after 90 minutes and Portugal to win in penalties.
Oh, okay. Ronaldo get the winning penalty in that one.
Well, I don't remember. Remember there was a penalty shootout at a previous tournament where they get knocked out. But he wanted to wait. He was like the fourth or fifth.
Missed it.
He was looking for glory as opposed to doing what most teams do, put the best penalty takers.
I didn't get the chance to hit it.
But no, I think they'll go.
All about Ronaldo? Never. That's never the case. Tony's went for a 1-0 win for Portugal. I'm going for a 2-1 win for Portugal. Switzerland are a team that could win that game. We saw it in the Euros last year. They beat France in the quarterfinals last 16. So they always get a result at major tournaments. Portugal, I've never got so much confidence over to when you've got a game like this where you'd expect them to win. Sometimes I feel like they do slip up, but I'll go 2-1 Portugal. And that leads us on to the quarterfinals. So at the moment, we know 2 of the quarterfinals. And first up is the Netherlands against Argentina.
I'm hoping that Argentina get through. I find I'm never that enamoured of the Dutch side. They don't excite me.
No.
I don't think. They're the sort of team, when I was watching them the other night, I thought they are the sort of team that could suddenly appear in a semi-final or final, kind of similar to 2010, where, they kind of almost under the radar.
Yeah.
They don't really excite you. But I think Argentina, after that fright of the first game and then slight struggle in the second game, I just get the feeling there's a wee bit of momentum building with them. I think they'll win 2-1.
Okay. I'd also said 2-1, but I'll change that and I'll go 1-0, just so we're different. I think it will be tight, but when Messi's on that form like he showed on Saturday night against Australia, then he's unplayable still. So I think he's going to get into the semis and then hopefully that'd set up a game against Brazil, which would be
incredible,
tasty. And Tony's went for a 2-0 win in Argentina, and then that leaves us with the last quarter-final game that we know of at the moment, and that is England against France. And we've kind of been debating this morning about England's chances in this one already and how they're looking. I think so far they've actually looked pretty decent for international standards, and I thought they were, as much as the first half an hour against Senegal, they kind of flattered to deceive. I actually think that was a strength for them that they then came back and won that game after going under pressure. And they've got some really, really exciting players. I don't know this one.
What are you predicting?
I've predicted one each. Yeah, which is sitting on the fence. I really don't know. Again, similar with like Spain, everything inside me. France are world champions. I mean, they were good against Poland, and Giroud, absolutely love Giroud as a player. I think he's absolutely brilliant. And Mbappe getting 2 goals, I think he's already scored more goals in World Cups than Cristiano Ronaldo. He's on 9 already, and he's probably going to end up going on and breaking Miroslav Klose's record at some point if he keeps on that track. So they're a really good team, France, and they've obviously got that individual talent as well. But I think it could be a cagey game, and I have been impressed with England.
Yes, I think England's great strength is they've got 4 or 5 match winners in there. You know, you give them one chance. You know, Harry Kane, Foden, Saka, Bellingham's been outstanding. So they've got goals in their team, so they'll create chances, and you know, so they're liable to get a goal. I think what has always been the great weakness of England in international tournaments is I don't think they keep possession well enough. I don't think they look as comfortable on the ball between the defence and midfield as other countries do. And I feel when they come up against a team, so for example a team like France who are so comfortable with possession and move it so quickly, I think they give the ball away too quickly because their back line I don't think are good enough on the ball. I think France might just edge it. And interestingly, I think that obviously the focus is on Mbappe, who's just been sensational. I agree with you. I think Giroud, you know, probably not for the first time you and I talk more sense than somebody like Graham Souness, who for inexplicable reasons ends up on national telly talking nonsense. But he described somebody of Giroud, his career as being a lucky player. But you know, it's astonishing. So I think they're the focus. I think Dembele on the right hand side. I just wonder if England will be so focused, and you know, even post match I heard some of the debate of how do England stop Mbappe, but I don't know if they'll just end up focusing so much on that there's so many other good players in the French side that allows, you know, so Mbappe might take all the interest and the attention, but it leaves some space for other players. I think France will shade it 2-1. Again, I think that's a team that they've got a great manager, and they've got a team that, you know, that look desperate to try and retain the World Cup, which is such a difficult thing to do. And I think just the fact that they can hold the ball better than England, I think ultimately that'll shade it. But I think it's going to be a very, very tight game. Actually, it's another game that you could actually see going to extra time and penalties. Although I'm not sitting on the fence with it, but
I think you're right though. With maybe focusing too much on Mbappe, I think that could be their downfall potentially, England, if they end up trying to change what they do so much to try and accommodate Mbappe. Or I've already heard people saying they might end up going back to a back 3 when they've been a back 4 this whole time, all that type of thing. And it's funny because there was like the heat map in the game against Poland, and all of France's players were pretty much their average positions on the left hand side, apart from Dembele. His average position was literally like on the touchline, like getting chalk against his boots. So that probably goes to that point where all the kind of play maybe focus in the left, and you just go bang out to the right, and then everything's open. But it's a good game. It's one of those ones where I think we were chatting about it before. We're chatting about it with a lot of people as well. You love having a shock in a tournament. It's brilliant. You know, you love supporting the underdog. But then see when you do get to the quarterfinals and you're looking at the moment, Netherlands against Argentina, England against France, potentially maybe an Argentina-Brazil semi-final. They are the games that get you excited, maybe a bit more so than if it were a Morocco or something like that. But it's still, either way, as long as you get the good games, then...
I mean, I think whoever wins that game will get to the final. Yeah. I think either of those two teams, I think, are capable, and just having that momentum then to reach the final, whoever they end up playing against, you know, and as I say, we're hoping for an Argentina-Brazil semi-final in the other one, but yeah, I think that game is key. I think if England get past it, I think they'll get to the final, and similarly for France.
Yeah, and to finish off on, we'll take one of the games from the Celtic teams. There's no women's team action, there's no first team action. We're left with the B teams this week, and their trip away to Cowdenbeath on Saturday. I'm going for a 3-0 win in that one. I think Celtic have started to a bit of form, scoring some goals. So I'd be quite confident with that one. We win that 3-0. What about yourself?
I'll go for 4-2. 4-2. There seems to be a few goals in the games in recent times, and the teams have maybe managed to nick a goal or two against us. But I think, as you say, we've got goals in that team. So 4-2 for Celtic.
Yeah. Tony's went for 2-0 in that win, and Tony's went for 3-1 for France in the England-France game as well. So I would take that. I would take that. But yeah, that's us for now for another week of the Celtic View podcast. Thank you very much for joining us, and do join us again next week. We hear the second part of that exclusive interview with Martin O'Neill. But for now, thanks very much, and see you then.